We have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait to next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
And welcome to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast, episode 78, powered by Fantasy Points Media Group. Today, we are taking a walk with Joe as we talk about the industry and how it's come from the early humble beginnings to where it's growing today. And no one better to talk us through the business things than Joe Bryant from Football Guys. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm great, y'all. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Well, it's exciting to have you on here. I know myself and Calvin and Tera, we've talked about this a few times, getting you on the show and how much it means for us. And like I said, when you talk about the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football, you kind of have to go back. And Joe, you're definitely right up there. Paul Charchian, Bob Harris, these are some of the founding fathers, in my opinion, of where fantasy football was. You know all these guys. You came in around the same time, maybe a little bit after, a little bit before some of them, but you're definitely one of the trailblazers when it comes to fantasy football in general.
Well, thank you, buddy. It's a lot of it, like a lot of things in life, we were at the right place at the right time, and we've been super fortunate, and it's been super fun. But yeah, we've been doing this a while, and Bob and Paul are close friends, and right in it about a little bit before I, as Bob actually was the first one to help me get published in a magazine back when people actually, that was the only way you did fantasy football back in the day. And so it's a fun business, fun industry, and a lot of fun people doing it.
And we'll get into this a little bit. Go ahead, Calvin.
I was just going to say, we talked to Bob a lot about the early days of the magazine business, and he would get was the 900 numbers. Was that him or Paul Charchian? It was one of them.
Yeah, they both are in it.
Yeah, and the Sunday night radio
good kind of 900 numbers, not the
right.
Yeah. There was a couple of versions of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Joe. Matt Waldman told me to say he likes to say sorry, Joe, even when he's on vacation.
That's right. I knew we were going to make it when I knew that was going to work when Sorry Joe became a thing.
Yeah. But all those big names, I mean, like in the early days, how aware were you even of what everybody else was doing, or how much reach you were getting on your stuff? Like how much were you even aware of how big things had gotten during the early days?
That's a great question, Calvin. And the answer really is not that aware, not that much. I mean, we knew we built our business. I mean, we did permission marketing, or that kind of marketing back before we even knew it was a thing. I mean, our idea. Seth Godin is a business writer that I have a ton of respect for, and I'd read. Well, this is how old I am. I was an audio cassette course that Seth Godin put out, and he had been a guy at Yahoo early on, and his whole thing was, earn a friend, make a friend, and earn their trust. And then if they trust you enough, and if you're good enough, maybe they'll buy something from you. And we realized that email marketing was our way to do that. And we started off with this idea that we would produce an email every day that summarized the news and gave our take on it and distribute that out. So we kind of, to answer your question, we kind of knew we had that 30,000 people pretty quickly that were on this free email list. And so that was, we had a sense of that. What we didn't have any sense for was how many people would buy, how many people would pay for information off of that free side. And like, it was pretty easy to tell. The internet has changed the world, but it's really just another platform. It was like, but what struck me about the internet was when, coming from a business, or all my life had been business. I've been as an entrepreneur my whole life. I was in the boat manufacturing business, and we started that in 1990. So 10 years after that, we started Football Guys, And what struck me about the internet, though, was that it was like a free printing press. It was you didn't have to buy any more paper or any more distributors or any more building to make more copies of the same thing. And when that light kind of came on, it was like, wow, that's this is something. This is a way to reach a gigantic number of people for very little incremental cost after you establish your base. And so that's when we got excited. So that's a long way of answering your question. Is we had a little bit of an idea of the market, and we hoped it would go to where it's gone.
We love taking the long way home. The longer the story, the better, because we can just sit here and we can listen to these all day. No, seriously, it's fantastic to kind of hear where we're going. I know I can't wake up. Like, my morning starts with that Football Guys newsletter every morning. As soon as I wake up in the morning, it's check the phone, and there it is. Let's go through this. I love it because it's like the 4 or 5, and then, of course, when the season comes, there's up to 12, 18, 19 little things. But you've got them all listed there where I can pick what I want, and then it brings me to where I want to go rather than having to go through the whole scroll. Because let's face it, and we've talked about this off before, as fantasy football consumers, our attention spans are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because the content out there is becoming greater and greater and greater. We've seen TikTok explode and these other little things where these 3-minute, Tera does a fantastic solo series she's got where it's a 3-minute clip on each player, 30 players in 30 days, where that we found that 3 minutes is a great time, 3 to 10 to keep your consumer's attention span. Anything above that, or if I have to read a lot of words to get to what I want to find, I may become disinterested in it. So I love the fact of that newsletter. I can see what I want to see, and I go right to it right away. So that's how my morning starts off, even before my morning coffee. I don't even roll out of bed yet before I read that newsletter.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you. And that's a real thing. I mean, that's part of the service that we provide is time. We're saving time. You could all of those stories, or most all those stories every day, are accessible. It's not like I have a secret interview that only I got. I mean, we just have, and USA Today helps us with that as well. And then with Cecil and Sig, and we've got all these sources that are scouring it, but we'll basically try to corral the internet of that day and then distill it down to here's the 5 to 10 stories that we think you ought to care about, and give you the link to the story if you want more. But the biggest part of that is we'll give our view of that. It's not just that this happened, it's this happened, and then we think it's going to make other things happen. Lots of times the real story is not about the player involved at all. It's about the peripheral players, or the backup player, or the ancillary player that person is related to. And I mean, obviously football, one thing we all love about football is it's so interconnected, right? Different than baseball where they're more of a standalone thing, but with football, it's every player matters to other players. And that's the value that we bring to it. But a lot of people, they're busy. I mean, people are busy today. And so if we can do that work of running that down, for you and bring it together and kind of give you a distilled down 90 proof version of the day, that seems to be something that's resonated with people.
You've always been kind of ahead of the market, I think, there at Football Guys in terms of like getting in early on some different platforms. And I remember, podcast, the Audible is one of the very first ones that I remember finding in fantasy football, and certainly got big. And there's other ways, obviously, that you guys, the subscription-based model, some of those things. What's kind of going on now with the, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's just the brief life of Clubhouse. There's been, some different, platforms, YouTube. Where do you think things are going right now? Like what Matt mentioned, the short attention span, how much is that playing into things? And, where do you see this whole market going?
That's a great question, Calvin. And someone asked me the other day something similar to that, and I kind of backed up and looked at it even further, further away, a higher view. And I'm big. People get tired that know me are tired of hearing me say it, but I say often the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing, and it's like focus on this. And our main thing is helping people win more at fantasy football. That's our core. That's nothing else we do really matters, but that. And we primarily do that through our website. Our website is our base, our anchor for that. All these other things, TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or Twitter or LinkedIn or Clubhouse or any of these things, to me, are almost kind of spokes on the wheel that come out. I mean, we're almost like fishing in those ponds of, okay, we're going to fish in TikTok and see if we can earn friends in TikTok and then pull them to the website. We're going to fish in Facebook and pull them here. And it just like, and fishing's probably a pretty good analogy there, because like fishing, you don't use the same lure in every place. Something that works on TikTok may not work on LinkedIn, or probably won't work on LinkedIn. And so we try to be relevant in each of those areas that we're, promoting to. But to me, Calvin, it all comes back to that website. So that's sort of our anchor. And it's nice in a way in that, like, because I'm pretty ambivalent towards these other platforms. If they're popular, I'm into them. When they die out, I'm not into them. And so like we're looking for what's next, and like everyone is looking for what's next. And we have done, I mean, you're being kind there, but I think we've actually done pretty poorly in a lot of these areas. We've been strong on Twitter and okay on Facebook. Up until this year, we've not been good at all on Instagram. That's changing. Our friend Troy King, as some of y'all know, is really doing some fun stuff for us on TikTok. And I'm good at knowing what I don't know. I mean, I know what's popular. I know that, but also know I try to, you got to put the right person in the right spot. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. We've got a pretty wide range of people too at football. I mean, somebody that likes Sigmund, Sigmund has a very beautiful, awesome style, but that may not hit with everybody. And they may be more into Victoria Greery or Troy King or Cecil Lammy or me or whatever. But the beauty about football, I think, is it's a pretty wide range. I mean, you see a lot of young people playing fantasy sports, and you see, older people playing. And so to me, it's like, let's have something for everyone there. I don't think it needs to be a one size fits all. That, to me, that's just never really worked very well. And that's backing up even further. That's always been our premise at the name. Is like, I knew from the start. I mean, some businesses are very, owner centric, and it's all about them. I mean, Ian Allen's one of my favorite people in the industry. He's awesome, but Fantasy Index is basically Ian Allen. I mean, there's not much outside of Index than Ian, and that works great for them. For me, I thought, I'll work myself to death if I try to do all that. If I try to do Ian's job for the whole website, it's not going to work. So let's delegate and let's do this and let's push this out. And it's funny now. I mean, I joke now sometimes, I'm not sure I could get a job here if I didn't own the company, because like these guys, Cecil and Sigmund and all these guys are so, they're so great at what they do. And my job is way more morphed into being kind of the band director. And I'm putting people in the best positions for them to succeed. And so we all have our role, we all have our part, but that's kind of been, so I answer your question again a long way, Calvin, but I see our anchor being the website, and then we'll just, and when, these will come and go. I mean, MySpace was a thing for a while and no longer, and who knows if TikTok will continue to rise or maybe it'll drop. I don't know, but we're going to, as long as it's popular, we're going to try to be there. So I think that's been our model, and I think that's going to continue to be the model.
Kind of touching on that, you really have assembled a fantastic crew over there with a lot of great diverse voices. Thank
you, Tara.
Yeah. How do you go about that process?
That's funny you asked that. That is, if everybody has their thing, right? And my thing is the team building part. I think I've got, I don't want to get weird about it, but I'm pretty good at that part. And so our number one thing, and maybe is my number one thing, is assembling a team. I go way more about the people first. I can teach someone to do things our way and to create an article the right way and to do, things kind of the football guy's way. But to me, if they're not someone that I'm good hanging out with and I want to be around, it just usually doesn't fit. And we've had, that's just a thing. And I was that way at it's not really a football guys thing. The boat company was that exact same way. We had some times where we just had to let people go that were talented craftsmen, but they just didn't have an attitude that fit with what we're wanting to do. And now, to answer your question on how we get them, Tara, or how we find them, a lot of them, we're fortunate and blessed to be as an old timer in this. They start coming to us more. I mean, it's almost like we've had the, again, just being around for a long time, but it's a very fortunate situation where, people will somewhat almost present themselves to us. And then Twitter has been great with that. Twitter is probably still our primary way where people can make a name for themselves and get established. And like I continue to point to like guys like Troy King and Dave Kluge and Lauren Carpenter and Victoria Greery and these folks, Sam Wagman. I mean, these guys, Jeff Bell, just off the top of my head, these names that come to mind, but they're people that have relatively new to the game or the industry, but they have just been exceptionally good on Twitter. And I always say too, there's all kinds of ways to skin a cat. It's like, I mean, some shtick, not shtick, some ways of doing things work. I mean, Barstool Sports is incredibly successful with a very, an irreverent brand and however they like to do it, that they are crushing it with that. Ours has been a little different. Ours has been, a little, different this way, but a lot of that you can see pretty easily on Twitter and see what kind of person they seem to be and how they engage and how they discuss. Because that's our thing. We want to position ourselves as the quote insider friend for that fantasy player. I mean, we want that fantasy player that goes, I got a secret source here that, helps me. And so our thing has been about, we need to interact with these people. We need to become friendly with them as much as it allows to be. The opposite of what we want is the quote expert that's like, man, I'm hoarding all my information here because I want to keep my edge, in a DFS contest or I'm playing Scott Fishbowl and see your shirt there, Matt. I don't want to let anybody else know. I understand that, but that's not going to be somebody that works well in our culture. So our thing is give. We just need to, we need to give. And that's how we bring value there. But Twitter but that's relatively new. I mean, in the last, 10 years or so, Tera, it used to be our message boards. We have a pretty vibrant fantasy football forum on our Football Guys site. And back then, that early on, like Sigmund and Cecil and Bob Henry and Jason Wood, kind of the OGs at Football Guys, they all came up through that system. But that was basically the same thing. You could see how they interacted. Keith Overton, that does all of our technical stuff, came up through our message board. He was just known as a guy on the message board that was super helpful with anything technical. And I remember we had a major problem on the site one day, and his handle was Memphis Foundry. And I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, not too far away from Memphis. And I remember messaging him going, do you live in Memphis? He's like, yeah. He goes, how about we meet in Nashville and talk? Because I think you can help me. And then that wound up being a 15-year relationship there, and it's been awesome. But yeah, so social media, for all the negativity you see directed at social media, there's a whole lot of positive things that come out of it because it lets people express themselves.
We'll get into the relationships a little bit later, but the first thing that stands out to me, and we've had, like I said, a lot of the football guys have come on the show. A lot of people who've been football guys and moved on have been on the show as well. When we sent out this tweet that Joe was going to join us today, Heath Cummings comes in, Scott Fish comes in. They talk about you being the GOAT of GOATs. But I think the one thing that's overlying when we look at all this is, and Joe, this comes down from the top down, is everyone we've had on the show has been a great person. And you kind of talked about that. You touched base on that. We'll get into relations a little bit later as well. But you kind of mentioned, I think Calvin kind of brought me around on this, that when you created Football Guys and the shows, it was something maybe your mother could watch, you know what I mean? And bringing those type of people in together. And, every single person has been humble that we brought on, kind, and, it kind of floors us as a smaller kind of podcast. And getting these bigger names in and being able to sit down like you're a group of four, you just finished 9 holes of golf, and now you're sitting on the 19th hole and you're just talking to one another and having a good time. That's what this show has been every time we bring someone in that's got the affiliation with Football Guys. And then, of course, Calvin and I and Tera, we've had opportunities to interact with the Kluges, the Kings, Carpenters. We've had Bell and Wagman, they're in chat rooms with us too. And that they fit that mold of everyone before them as far as Football Guys is concerned. So, but that all stems from that leadership from you and being able to find the proper pieces to fit that puzzle, which the Football Guys is. So I don't think that's something that can go unsaid. And I think it's very important. I try to do a similar thing. If I make sure we never put a team together, you want to make sure you get all the right pieces.
Mhm.
Everyone's interacting well. And I know for you, you're kind of a mentor to me on how to assemble a team. I'm not good at podcasting. I'm not good at writing. So hopefully I can do something, put something together and make it work.
You're underselling yourself
Yeah.
there, buddy. But
He's the king of underselling himself.
yeah, right.
Don't get me to sell your car, though. Eh? Don't get me to
no.
Yeah, it sounded like
underneath.
that sounded like Lou Holtz right there. You know, they're going to decide on Thursday if they're going to even play or not. You know,
Right.
yeah.
But why was that particular brand style important for you? Like, like you said, there are many ways to go about this. And like you mentioned a couple there. But like, why was that my mom could listen to the show and want her to still, to not be turned off by it? Why was that an important thing for you?
I think the answer to that, Calvin, is you have to be true to yourself and be, the authenticity and all that. That's a big buzzword and all that. And I think it's, the honest answer is it's just a lot easier to be true. Like you don't have to remember who you are. I mean, we were talking to somebody the other day and they were, they're known kind of on Twitter as being kind of a heel and a wrestling, heel tough guy and mean and whatever. And they said in reality, like he's really a nice person in person. And I thought to myself, that's got to be so tiring. It's like, it's like you're like putting on this persona when you're on and you're not, and it's like, it's just easier to be who you are all the time, and so I remember somebody said one time, it's just easier to tell the truth. You don't have to remember what you lied about that way. And it's just, so for me, and I'm not saying I'm a nice guy or anything, but that worked for us. That was like what felt natural to us. And my partner, David Dawes, was the same way. And it was like, let's just be us. And also, again, Barstool would make the case, this is not the case, but to me, it always seemed like good business. It was like, why, like our thing, for anybody that doesn't know, the Sorry Joe thing is like, I remember asking Cecil and saying like, please don't curse when we do the podcast stuff. And it sometimes will slip out and they usually throw a Sorry Joe on it. But to me, like cursing is just one of those things, like, it's just the upside usually doesn't cover the downside, in my opinion. Now, a million podcasts are hyper successful with tons of, Gary Vaynerchuk and these guys and Howard Stern. So certainly my way is not the only way, but that just works for us. And it was just easier to be somebody that you normally are. What, for better or for worse, what you get from me is pretty much who I am. So that's worked. But I think you're right, Matt, that what you said, big time going. If I always ask, people, and we're again fortunate and blessed where people will ask me for sometimes advice, and I'll say, just be who you are, be that. I mean, if your thing is being the other way, don't be like me. Be who you are and be what works for you, and listen and get feedback. But just it's all about people. This is our business really becomes, I was talking to someone the other day and they said, there's kind of three angles to information. There is, speed of information, like how fast something comes out, how fast do you distribute the story? There's accessibility, like who does have access to the players or the owner, whatever insight there is. And then the last one is storytelling. And it's like, how do you feel when you interact with that person? And for the first two, with speed and accessibility, are kind of become a commodity these days. Now with, a lot of these apps are so great with Sleeper and Fantasy Life. And you get stuff just instantly. So everybody almost expects that now. It's not really, nobody's wowed because it's like, oh, that just expected to happen. And accessibility is really kind of the same thing. As soon as Adam Schefter talks to someone, he tells everybody. So, we all kind of have Schefter's almost access. And so to me, the real variable there is storytelling and how people feel. And that dramatically is related to people and what kind of people you have, doing this.
I love that you mentioned the speed and access. Yeah, I love my updates that I get on the Sleeper app. I feel like during the football season, you're on it every single time.
Yeah.
As the landscape starts changing and people are going more and more towards instant access and different avenues, how does that influence how you move forward?
That's a great question, Tara. I think the answer to that is really not that much different. It's the same game. It just moves faster. In other words, like it's still okay. Player X got hurt in practice and player Z is filling in. Our job is still, okay, what's that mean? The difference is it just happens a little bit faster. So I don't think it changes it all that much. And it's still with our overarching goal of helping that person win more. We pretty much do the same thing. It's just faster. And similarly, it's really what the internet did, right? I mean, it's the same type of information as the newspaper was. It just happens 30 seconds after something happens instead of 3 hours or whatever after something happens. But that's still core. That, to me, and I always love it. I have a love-hate relationship with internet stuff. It has changed the world, but it's not like it's changed the basic laws of human interaction. People still want to be valued. They still want to be heard. They still want to have people do things for them. In our case, it's gather a bunch of information and condense it down and then give our, what we would call an expertise of a take on it. Those things are still the same. They were that way 100 years ago, and they'll be that way 100 years from now. The speed of it just happens faster with internet and the accessibility of it. You can reach people so much faster.
Want to go back a little bit, probably during the days of Joe Bryant, the boat guy. But do you remember your first fantasy league? Do you remember like when you first became aware of fantasy football at all?
Yeah, I was a fantasy baseball player, Calvin. I was playing. I was big, and Bill James was my hero, or still is my hero, with baseball analytics. And as you may know, I mean, rotisserie baseball was much bigger, way sooner than football was. And I was playing through the 90s. I think my first league was like 1990. And, it's like Ricky Henderson and Jose Canseco and these folks. And there used to be a book, actually printed book called the Fantasy Rotisserie Baseball Guide. It came out every year, Daniel Okrent, and I forget, I'm missing the other ones, but it was published each year. And I mean, believe it or not, it had actual player dollar values, what they thought should go for, in the draft. And that would be printed like probably 6 months before, you're actually drafting these players. And so I was into that, and then they had the Major League Baseball strike, which was 94, I guess. And I thought, well, when I remember I was playing a sporting news league and a local league, and it cut off. I'm like, wow, what am I going to do now? And so I started thinking about, I'd always loved football, but there just wasn't, there wasn't much of a structure in. And that was kind of, mid to late 90s was when the internet was just starting to happen. And that was kind of when I was having those revelations, as I was saying to you about being a free printing press. But yeah, so my first league would have been like 97, 98, and which is old, again, it's ridiculous now to think about it, but like you got your news from the newspaper, and it was crazy. Paul Charchian, who hopefully talked about it if he came on, but they would print their fantasy football weekly magazine in Minneapolis on Sunday night, ship it out Monday morning. It would get to places like Knoxville, Tennessee on Thursday at the bookstore. I mean, you had to go to the bookstore to buy it. And it was ridiculous. Now, I mean, now you have stuff on your phone just the second as it happens, near real time. But yeah, so it was a long time ago. But interestingly enough, things have changed somewhat. Like it was heavy TD only back then. And like I remember we used to have I don't know if many leagues were like this, but we had like some ridiculous bonus points for quarterbacks that could rush. So like things like that, and guys like Michael Vick were like 3 times more valuable than the best, than the second best quarterback. We had the first PPR league that I ever remember coming in was way back, and Larry Centers was a fullback for the Cardinals that didn't do a whole lot of running, but he had great hands, and he would catch 70 balls a year, and he would be as valuable, as running backs that were stars, where Larry Centers was not a star. And that kind of, I don't know, maybe if you guys want to get into this, but the value-based drafting stuff, that's where that came from, of actually that came from two things. It came from baseball, my time in baseball, where catchers who normally hit all that well, but everyone has to start one, were incredibly valuable. Everyone just sort of got that. It was a supply and demand thing. There weren't many good hitting catchers. So guys like, dating myself, like Gary Carter, those guys were like really valuable catchers. In the same way, I started looking at football and nobody was doing stat projections. Everybody was just doing nothing but rankings. So a guy like Larry Centers didn't really rise up to the top. Where he would rise up to the top is when you would take his projections and say, okay, Centers is going to catch, 70 passes, and you run that through your scoring system, and you would say, wow, Larry Centers is like the, RB 15 here on my scoring system, but nobody was thinking that. So you started that was common in baseball. Everybody did that on baseball, but people weren't doing it much on football. So I kind of took what I knew there and applied it over here.
I love that value-based drafting. I still use that, especially when we look at tight ends and stuff like that, where you want to put that value in. We see that all the time with that big three. Maybe you can make an argument for that big four.
Right.
And then, because everyone needs a tight end, even if it's non-premium. But for me, that's how I do my rankings before I go into my home leagues and stuff. I'll take a look at what I got and like, okay, you know what? I've got Kelsey here at, I don't know, hypothetically 18. Well, you know what? Let's bump him up. He was basically the wide receiver 2 last year, based in PPR. So even at half point PPR, which I think is the weirdest thing ever to say, half point PPR, but that's for another conversation.
Right.
So then all of a sudden you bump him up to wide receiver 2 / tight end 1. And now you're looking at Kelsey as 108, 107, depending on what you're looking at. And that's basically how I do all my drafts. So value-based drafting is the way I've been using for years as far as football goes. And again, that's another thank you on that one as well. So,
well, good. Yeah, but it just makes sense. I mean, it's a math, and to me, and y'all probably think this way too. I mean, the beauty of fantasy sports is there's the math and then the art. I mean, it's like, and some people lean really heavy on math, and that certainly is valuable. And some people lean really heavy on the art or the gut feel part of it. And to me, the beautiful thing is when you can kind of merge the two together. And I think we do. We were talking about that the other day, and I'm pretty pleased with how we're able to do that at Football Guys, of bring both sides of that in. We've got some super smart math people, and we've got some super smart, gut feel people. And I think too much of either one can be problematic. But when you kind of can blend them together, I think you get a really good thing going.
Well, speaking of the both sides thing, you're as you're talking about this, you're making me realize. So the new guys that you brought on, the Troy Kings, the Dave Klug, Victoria, who we all know very well, Jeff Bell.
They're awesome.
When they write an article, it's very different than the novel that Matt Waldman writes, for instance, and the level of detail. Like, what's the importance of, I guess, having both of those types of articles on your site so that it caters to both people who are there that want that extra and understand the why and the how and the depth that Matt Waldman will bring, versus somebody who might just want to say, like, no, tell me who to pick up.
Right. I think a lot of, and y'all are asking great questions. I think a lot about that, and I think why it works is because, and I don't know, I've yet to come up with a really good way to verbalize this. So forgive me for just freelancing here, but it's almost like a buffet line in that you can pick and choose what you like without it getting in your way. Whereas if you go down a buffet line and you want to have, I don't know, the roast beef, you don't really mind that there's fish there too. You just go past that and pick the roast beef. If you're at a restaurant that's like serving courses that are brought to you, maybe a fancy restaurant, you're kind of aggravated when they bring you fish if you don't like fish and you really want the roast beef. The difference is where it works for us is that we're way more like that buffet line. The guy that doesn't like the long form stuff just skips over Matt, and he hardly even notices it. Now, if the site were a book, if this was a book, you might get a little aggravated because it's like, oh, that's Waldman. I don't want that. Give me the condensed down stuff, or vice versa. Maybe you're looking for Waldman type stuff, deep stuff. You're aggravated that you have to skip over those 5 pages to get to that. A website is much more pick and choose and do that. So I don't think it hurts us. Now, the danger, Calvin, is you get to be watered down trying to be all things to all people. And that can be a recipe for disaster. I think that is less applicable for a buffet line than it is, a restaurant where they're serving you courses. So I don't mind that. The upside of what doing it our way is you're able to broaden that net a little bit wider. And I've always said, it doesn't really matter what I like. I'm in the business of providing what the customers want. And the truth of it is, though, customers want a lot of different things. I mean, some things, that some people really do. Tell me who to start. I don't have time for this, Joe. I trust you. Give me the list, and that's all I want. And but we are a business, so here's my money. Give me the list. Other people say, man, this is my thing. I love this stuff. I want to read every single thing you're going to produce. And Matt Waldman is my favorite guy because he goes super deep. Give me that. Well, he's also a paying customer. So to me, I can satisfy both of those folks without really annoying either one that now again, there's lots of different ways to do business. Some people will say, hey, the best thing you can do is go super deep into one niche. You need to own the IDP Dynasty Devi market, like go right here, super deep on that. That works for folks. For us, I've always felt you were a little bit better off broadening it out and trying to hit more people. And that's been effective for us. But
yeah,
anyway, the beauty of this sport and this game is that there are lots of different things people like to pull in to do it. Right. So to me is, and I don't think it may, I get a fair bit of criticism that, oh, you're the mega site and you're like Walmart, and Walmart kind of sucks because it's got everything. And I'm like, I don't really think so. Yeah, it might bother you. Again, Walmart's kind of like that restaurant that has the courses, right? If I do have to walk by 30 aisles of stuff to get to the thing I want, I'm a little aggravated. But with the internet, it's just, you're just sort of pick and choose and that. And we also find too, I mean, trends change. I mean, there is definitely more trend lately, or not lately, in the last few years, of a more condensed. Tell me, it's long form journalism, and it is not as popular probably as it used to be, although it's still, the Ringer crushes it still. They do some really great stuff. I mean, that's the other thing too, Matt, you mentioned, I'm with you. As soon as I start talking about it, I'll tell my podcast guys, keep it short, keep it tight. We don't need a lot of talk. And then I look and who's the most popular podcast out there? And Joe Rogan will go 2 hours before he, and it's like, well, maybe obviously that works too. So I've kind of given up on trying to, I think it's actually a little bit arrogant for me to assume I know what everyone wants. Let me offer this up and we'll see. And fortunately you can track, we can see how popular these articles are. And I'll say this, Matt Waldman gets a ton of clicks on his stuff, but then also the condensed, quick hitter, tell me who to start, gets a ton of clicks. And so to me, I like hitting both sides of it.
Well, some of it's being true to yourself, right? And so part of being true to yourself is, being unashamed to be in the no doubt division of Scott Fishbowl. And we know you're there, no doubt. And as we talk about music, I want to, we ask everybody on the show this. So what would be the intro music if you had to pick something? If you were a closer in baseball, you mentioned that, or a wrestler, and you had to come out to something, would it be No Doubt?
No Doubt was not. He did the fan page on that, and Scott's my buddy, and I was doing that just to give him a hard time. I told someone that I was listening. I think Matt, he was on Matthew Berry's podcast the other day, and they mentioned, I guess, Gwen Stefani was in No Doubt, right? And I didn't know that, so I'm kind of ashamed to admit I'm not a No Doubt, and hopefully that kicked me out of the division there. But I just love it. I love Scott so much that as the fact that he was the No Doubt fan page thing is so good. I couldn't let that go. And I wonder too, they're probably what I always feel bad about even being in the league because I don't want to take a spot from somebody. But I said, there probably was, I was going to guess there might be an open spot in No Doubt, division there. Yeah. Music wise, Calvin, I'm a Avett Brothers, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm kind of old school on that stuff, but we were laughing the other day about Murder in the City, I think is my favorite Big Brother song. But yeah, I'm more basic stuff there.
Awesome. So let's keep diving into you personally. Let's talk about, the importance of sports to you growing up. What did you play? Favorite players and favorite teams?
Really? Okay, good. Yeah, I was always played football growing up. Grew up in Texas, where football rules. I went to Amarillo High School and we played Odessa Permian every year. The Friday Night Lights, origin story. We beat Odessa Permian my sophomore year. It was the first time they'd lost a home game in 7 years, and got the police escort out of town and all that. But yeah, so football was a big. I was good enough to play, high school, big time high school at the 5A Texas football, but not good enough to play college. So, and I had a couple of small opportunities, and I realized I knew that wasn't going to be my, lifetime profession. So do that. Played, and that was really my best sport, I guess. I liked all sports and for sure followed all sports as a kid, even, in Texas, hockey, I'd never seen live hockey, but you're following Stanley Cup, just because that's what you did when, you followed sports. But yeah, I loved all that. And then just gravitated over the last, 15, 20 years. And it shocks me every year at playoff time when I'm reminded how little I know about other sports now. When baseball's on or NBA's on, and I'm like, man, I'm pretty shallow on some of these sports. But that was sort of I guess just that's what happens when you become a father and have and try to do these things. You sort of have to narrow your focus down. But now it's pretty much only NFL, Tara. Awesome. Even college stuff. I know you're a Clemson fan. And again, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and college football is bigger here than NFL football. And, but and you have to have basically a cursory knowledge of what's going on just to survive in Knoxville, but yeah, it's pretty much all NFL for me.
What about some of those favorite players? I know you're a big John Gruden fan. I think I read that somewhere too. I like John
Gruden a lot. Yeah. I was always funny, man. I was always on the kind of goofy, not goofy, but like Ironhead Hayward, those kind of players, and kind of like not everybody's. Sort of to me, football has always been about personalities and fun stuff there, and so yeah, and I'll even just odd like Bill Bates. Maybe that might have been because of a Tennessee connection, but playing for the Cowboys. And, to me, that grinder kind of, and maybe because that's the kind of athlete I was myself, not especially talented. And it was just more the grinder, and made it work, being scrappy and, fighting through stuff. But I just Ironhead Hayward was that guy, and he was just fun and just worked hard and seemed like a fun, player to be around. But that does make, that to me too, that's a super fun part of fantasy sports, right? You can let your heart get in, outrule your head sometimes about players you like or don't like, or, don't want to go there, do want to go there. And sometimes that works. And sometimes that can be at your detriment depending on who the player is. But yeah, that's a fun part of the game, right?
Absolutely. We'll get more into the journey because I got some questions to kind of go there. But outside of marriage and the birth of the children, I know you've got the barbecue business. You've got which, by the way, the philanthropy that comes with it, Feeding Under the Bridge. Beautiful story that I saw on Twitter. So thank you for sharing that as well. Besides marriage and the birth of children, what's the one decision that kind of changed the trajectory of your life? Maybe fantasy football, maybe personal. What's that one decision that changed Joe Bryant to where you are?
The easy answer on that is marrying my wife. That is by far the best thing that ever happened to me. She has been my business partner from the get and is fantastic. I say just anything, and I'm again super lucky to have a lot of good things that happen to me, and almost every good thing about me somehow is directly related to her. So I always tell guys, and most of that's grace of God, that I just, it wasn't like I had any special insight there that I knew she was the one. I think it was a mom that prayed a lot for me, or maybe, but I always tell these guys, hey, the best thing you do is marry well above yourself and be glad of it. But that's the cheesy answer, I guess, Matt, but that's the easy answer and super truthful for me. But today still, she's the most capable, smartest person that I've ever known. And she keeps me organized. I'm good about, I can see ideas and I'll run off and chase this thing and that. And she's the one that can keep our business, in between the lines going, okay, how are we going to do this? And how's that actually going to happen, Joe? And what about these other 9 things that you were just as excited about yesterday, that now are maybe not going to get done. And so she keeps me grounded there on that.
Obviously the relationship with your wife being very important. But you also, none of us ever get to where we're going in life without, other people around us that help us get there.
100%.
And you've mentioned a couple of them already, but who are some of the, thinking about the fantasy football world, who are some of the people that really helped you and that those relationships that were really important and that you respected a lot along the way?
Yeah. Bob Harris was easily, my first person that reached out to me. I'm trying to say this the right way, I guess. He was so kind to me, already established. And that's awesome, Matt. You say y'all have, well, that's Bob, right? That was 23 years ago with Bob, and he's still doing that today. I mean, that's the kind of guy Bob is. Calvin, you're hit on, I don't know if you've been reading my email or what, but this is like that idea that we all have had help. I mean, my dad was an entrepreneur from the get. His father died when he was a boy, and so he if there was anybody that you would call a quote self-made man, it was my dad. He from 10 years old doing this and was in several very successful businesses and all that. And I remember thinking that was the ideal thing. And then as I started looking at it, even with him, he had a ton of help along the way. There's always people that are helping you in a way, and it doesn't make you any less of a success. In fact, if I would argue, it makes you more, it's more celebrated to say, hey, this person was kind to me here, or that person gave me a thing. There's some people you don't even know them. You just see them and you're inspired by that or whatever. But yeah, Bob was a big one. Paul Charchian was very kind to me early on. Ian Allen was very gracious and allowed me to, I joke about most of Index as Ian. Well, he let me write an article 2002 or 3 maybe. And it was like, people and I didn't even realize then how big a deal it was. That like you're in Joe's, it was like Ian Allen and Joe basically wrote this thing. And I was, it was I had a very small piece of it, but so yeah, but those are, and it's the same folks you think of. Greg Ambrosius was always very kind to me. And this industry was built on those folks and they kind of paved the way. And then, but there's a thing too. I don't know if this is what happens when you get old or not, but I'm starting to sense I've got some of that obligation as well now to like, hey, what can I do to help this younger generation, coming up? That's maybe where I was when I was 30 years old. And so I get a ton of satisfaction out of that, it's really funny. I'll talk to guys like Troy King or Dave Kluge or, Victoria Greer, these folks getting started. And I think they're awesome. And yet they're looking to me like, what can I learn? And I'm like, I don't think I can teach you anything. I'm trying to learn from y'all. But I think it's keeping that attitude. Maybe that's the secret of just like staying curious about it and knowing I feel like now I know less than I knew when I was 30 years ago. And that's not true at all. It's just that I know what I don't know now, or I'm way less certain that I've got the perfect answer for everything that I thought I had when I was 30, yeah, so I think it's that constant, and that's really how life should work, right? I mean, that's the way a business works, the way a church ought to work. That's the way a school ought to work. It's like the ones up here take the ones not quite as far down the road as they are yet and help them. It's not that they're any smarter. I mean, I hang around. I mean, I made a concerted effort about 15 years ago to start trying to gather, guys 15, 20 years younger than me and do some of this stuff. And I'm not smarter than any of them. I'm just older. I've just experienced more things, simply because I'm a little further down the road. But yeah, I think that's a big deal about how you can give back and keep it going. And it's beautiful. Like Chris Allen is fantastic. Chris has only been with us about, I think it's his second year. Well, when we brought some of these new folks on, kind of this first class, we hired, I guess it was Dave and Troy and maybe Adam Wilde all at the same time. And Chris, Chris is young too, but he's probably 5-8 years older maybe than those guys. And he took it on himself. I didn't ask him to do it. He organized a little group chat thing, and he was kind of hanging out on Zoom calls with those three and just showing them the ropes kind of. And I'm like, and I told, when I found out about it, I said, Chris, that is I can't tell you how happy that makes me that we're in this organization where you on your own took it upon yourself to welcome these new people in. And it's just beautiful. And it kind of it's sort of, I joked the other day, it's like farming. It's like you farm, you work, you feel like you're doing stuff. And then you get to a point in your life, and I'm fortunately seem like I'm there, is that you have all these good things that start happening that you don't really feel like you did anything for. It's almost like, it's like the harvest that I'm just sitting here and all these awesome things are falling in my lap, like Chris taking these other, younger folks under his wing. And it's just beautiful. But I think, and then, I'll be shocked if in a couple of years, Troy isn't doing the exact same thing for, the then 22-year-old person that he's pulling in. And so it just continues on. It's a beautiful thing when it works right.
Yeah, completely agree. We've talked a lot about the evolution of the industry, the changes, things that you've seen, being in depth from the very beginning and all of the transition until now. What are some of the biggest changes within the industry that you've seen versus when you started to where we are now?
That's a great question too, Tara. I think, in some ways it hasn't changed at all. And that the basic premise of a successful business in this industry still has to be the same, and that you've got to bring value to the reader and or to the the viewer. And so that part hasn't changed. I think what's changed maybe is how that value happens. Is it video? I'll never forget when Cecil Lammy came to me in 2005. Cecil's a radio guy, and he said, "Hey, we need to do a podcast." I'm like, "Great, what's a podcast?" And he's like, "Well, it's basically like free." He goes, "Imagine what we do at Football Guys to Sports Illustrated is a podcast to Westwood One." And I was like, "So it's basically anybody can do it, and you just get on." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. Let's do that." And so those kind of methods are changing, Tara, and speeding up. But the value is about the same. I mean, video obviously is a bigger thing. I mean, back then it was all just written word. But again, it's funny, video, audio, written, those are kind of that same idea of someone that likes long form or funny stuff or concise. It's like personally, I like written still. I like written stuff because I like to be, and maybe it's an ego thing, but I like to skim right to what I want. I don't want to have to, now I hope tons of people watch this video, but the problem sometimes with video is like, man, if I'm not into this, that I really only want this one little section of this video, and video is not as conducive to that. But also video is much more entertaining than you can be with written word. So I think, to me, the big change, to answer your question, is the way it has expanded into different mediums. When we started, I assumed that we would somehow have a video element and an audio element. But in 2000, all we had was just a written element. All any of us had was written back then. but it's super exciting. I mean, the amount of, to me, that phone in our pocket is the great equalizer of like how many kids now are making great movies on their phone that 30 years ago, the only people that got to do that were kids that went to USC film school or whatever it was and had that special, how many did we miss? How many great movies have we missed over the years because kids didn't have access? Now they've got it. We couldn't have done back in 1980, the only way you had a voice in fantasy sport or sports were you had to write for a newspaper or magazine. And the only way, not the only way, but primarily way, you had to have a journalism degree from the right school from Missouri or Michigan or, those kind of schools that produce those things, or you had to know somebody at one of the, major networks and you had to have an in. Well, I could have never been that voice back in 1970. But in 2000, it's like, no, it's to me, it's the meritocracy. It's like, if you're good, and that's what I tell people all the time, is like, just get out there and do it. It's if you're good, you'll succeed. If you're not good, you won't. It really doesn't matter who your dad is. Doesn't matter how much money you have. If you're not good on YouTube, or if you're not good on that podcast, or you're not good at writing, you're not going to make it. And so it's the good news, bad news. The good news is everybody has a shot. The bad news, everybody has a shot. So it's strict competition, but the winner are us as consumers, right? Because you get just a giant, choice of who to support, who to pick. And the winners also are it allows so many more people to take their shot that used to just never get a shot.
I love that you mentioned kids and their YouTube, because my kid, he has a YouTube video that's like literally 20 seconds long, and it's got more views than anything I've ever put out there.
Hey.
And it makes no sense to me, but apparently it's gone off. It's gone viral or whatever. I'm like, what is this? What am I watching?
That's right.
I just got to keep piggybacking off of Tera's question there. What have you learned in fantasy sports? And maybe more so, what have you learned about yourself through fantasy sports?
I think the thing I learned, I had proven, maybe, Matt, I think I may have known this in my head and didn't really know it in my heart until I saw it over and over, is, again, it sounds so cheesy, but if you give value, it'll come back to you. And not everything is transactional. You don't have to be like, if you stop going around looking at, well, I don't want to know if I give this, only if I get this in return. And you just have to get past that. And so just give. And if you're good at it, if the value you're giving is enough value, good things will happen. You don't need to always constantly be figuring out what the ROI of everything is. And is that, you have to use your brain. You can't just like throw you wind up, you have to be able to support yourself. But if you can look at it less of a transactional thing and more like, how can I help? And if you can help, people will appreciate that. That'll come back to you. And if you help enough and you help in a right way, you also don't have to have any qualms about that being a business. Like, guys, when we first started, there's a better answer to your question, Tera. One other big thing was when we started, the internet was all about peace, love, and free. It was like you were a scumbag if you dared to charge money on the internet for something. And it was, and then eventually people started looking at, well, that's cool, but like somehow or another, if you really want better quality than just a constant churn of college interns writing stuff, you're going to have to pay maybe, and not a lot, but it's like, it's like, you're going to have to help us support this. And this is how you're going to do that. And so back to that, Matt, if you give, just give without expectation of return. And at least for a while, maybe you can't do that forever. At some point you do have to have something in return. But if you just go with that idea of how can we help? How can I help? And if you do that well enough, the business part will take care of itself.
I know I speak for everybody when I say, like, we could probably sit here and ask you questions for forever and not get bored. And there's probably like 10 different things you said over the course of this last hour that we could probably do a whole show on just that one topic.
You're kind, but I'll come back. Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to.
But yeah, just really appreciate. And, obviously Football Guys has a lot of things going on, but what are some of the things this off season that you guys are working on that anybody watching could support and could get value from, as you said?
Well, thank you about it. Yeah. Our offerings are still the same. We do a ton of stuff for free. Our thing has always been, let's earn their trust. Get that in it. You got to earn their trust before they're going to give you any money. That's just kind of a basic premise of business there. But we have our 3 subscriptions. We have a season-long pro, the DFS pro, and then the all pro that are the 2 subscriptions combined. So it's pretty simple. And keep an eye on the website. We've got some fun things coming on the website there in the next few weeks that I think folks are going to enjoy. And then just support us on our social media stuff, especially Instagram is one we're really trying to get a foothold on and do better with. And then Twitter's always been good for us. And then, hit up Troy on TikTok there. And he's doing a lot of fun stuff with us on that. But I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank y'all for that.
Well, Joe, you've got an open invitation to come on whenever you want. You know what? I could sit here and we could have this conversation all day long. I think Calvin and Tera would love to pick your brain a little bit more. And I'm sure the listeners would love to listen to what you have to say. With that said, make sure we check out Calvin and Hobby there. He's got a little series over there at DLF. He's got Team Spotlight going on again. He did it earlier with on the ViperCast, so you're going to check that out. Tera's got her 30 players in 30 days series going on. Make sure you pop onto the YouTube, check that out. And then Tera and I got a little project working on together here that we're in the midst of putting out there. And check out Fantasy Points Media Group. Fantasy Points there, John Hansen, Joe Dolan, Graham Barfield, Tom Broly, some of the great guys in fantasy sports. If you want to get a subscription, hit 21 Vipers 10 for 10% off that subscription base. And I leave you with this. This may be someone famous. This might have been Joe Bryant who said this himself. If you tell the truth, it becomes part of your past. If you tell a lie, it becomes part of your future. So with that, I leave that. And with that, this is episode 78 of the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast. And let's keep her simple. We're gone.